Hi friends, today we're going to extend our discussions about polygons to talk about quadrilaterals specifically, and that's actually going to be the rest of this unit, is we're going to just be talking about quadrilaterals, because just like triangles have a lot of special properties, which we spent an entire unit talking about, quadrilaterals also have a ton of special properties that we can use to find angles, to find sides, and do other things with. So we're going to start specifically with parallelograms because parallelograms have a lot going on. So we're going to just list and then mark also this diagram, okay? So the first special property that parallelograms have is all parallelograms have two sets of parallel sides. Okay, so these two are congruent, or I'm sorry, not congruent, parallel, and then these two are parallel. And that is the definition of a parallelogram. So if you're ever trying to justify why something is a parallelogram, or if you know it's a parallelogram and you're trying to justify that it has parallel sides, that is just the definition of a parallelogram, is that the opposite sides are congruent. Okay? Next property is that opposite sides are congruent. So that means the opposite sides are both parallel and congruent. Okay, that's not the definition of a parallelogram. That's actually a theorem that tells us that. So don't use definition of a parallelogram if you're trying to state that the opposite sides are congruent. That's different. Okay. Our next property is that the opposite angles are congruent. Okay, so this angle, this top angle are congruent, and then the top left and the bottom right are congruent. Okay, so opposite angles, the non-consecutive angles are congruent. Let's do that. Okay, the next is that consecutive angles are supplementary. Okay, so that means if we name this parallelogram Toad, okay, if we do that, we know that if we take the measure of t right here and add it to the measure of angle O up here, that's going to give us 180 degrees. Similarly, measure of O and measure of A is 180. Measure of A and measure of D is 180. And D plus the measure of T is 180. So consecutive angles are angles that are not opposite, that come one right after another. They share a side. Okay, so all of those sets of consecutive angles, all four sets, are supplementary. Okay, and to finish, let's see, I'll do this teal color. Diagonals. So if we draw our two diagonal lines, that's not how you spell that. Diagonals. There we go. They bisect each other. They are not necessarily congruent, but they do bisect each other, which means they cut each other in half. So if I draw that line, and if I draw this line, then I know that, let's see, 1, 2, we're on to 3 now. And 1, 2, 3. So those two pieces are congruent because this right here is our bisecting point. So they cut each other in half each direction. And then 2, 3, 4, this segment and its other segment on the diagonal are congruent. Okay, the diagonals are not necessarily congruent. They could be, but they're not necessarily. Okay, so these are our main properties of parallelograms. And then later on, we're going to talk about more specific properties that we have of special types of parallelograms and also other quadrilaterals.